Hey everybody, welcome back to the Let's Slam podcast. I'm your host, Baho. So, today I want to talk about the struggles of the internalized hate that I had for my ethnic identity and how that really shaped me into the person that I am today. So, growing up, I found difficulty in loving my ethnic and cultural background. I didn't realize the resentment that I had for my background until maybe my teenage years. And those are the years where you're really trying to figure out who you want to become, and you start exploring different aspects of your life, as most teenagers do, while navigating through the trials of school and relationships. I believe it was in junior high that I started hating being Hmong, and I think a lot of that hate stemmed from the cultural expectations that the elders had for our youth. Being Hmong American, on one side of the cultural spectrum, you can be a creative and carefree individual who can participate in luxuries that help define who you are. And on the other side of the spectrum, you must adhere to strict cultural norms for the sake of saving face, bringing honor to your family, and leaving a good, lasting impression on friends and relatives. So, coming from an immigrant family who escaped the war torn countries of Laos and Thailand, you grow up with dual identities, and so you're faced with a culture clash. One exhibits the freedom that our people dreamed of for so long, and the other is filled with archaic ideas that resist and go against progressiveness. I really believe most of us would choose the former and not the latter. Growing up with elders, they would always tell you that you cannot dye your hair, have piercings, or get tattoos because, in their eyes, only bad people would do that. So, in turn, it would make you look bad too, or make you bad. This was never much about trying to save you or showing care for you, but I really think that it was more so to save their own asses from judgment. In Asian culture, there is such an emphasis on good impressions and how that affects how one looks at you and your family. So it was more of something to not bring shame to your family. We were forced to sacrifice external creativity for the sake of the majority, and that was something that I couldn't get on board with. So many of us were hindered from becoming who we wanted to be at that moment. There were so many missed opportunities to explore our youth. Excuse me. Another thing that bothered me was the things that I saw on TV. And what I mean by that is I saw American families on TV and how their values and interactions were so different than what we experience in our own homes. Parents always talked things out with their kids, sat down with them like a normal human being, and talked about their feelings rather than being scolded for them. That reminds me, there's a podcast that I love listening to called the Genius Brain Podcast with David So as the host. And one of his guests told a story about one of his Asian friends who suffered from mental health, a topic that is almost non existent in Asian society. His friend suffered from depression, and one day he decided to bring up to his mother that he wanted to take his own life. The mom just laughed and said, "Yeah, right." And she just brushed it off. And, I felt like I could never go to my parents for anything because I knew that it would always turn into a lecture or a good scolding. And internalizing all of your issues and not being able to express yourself freely because of the way Asian parenting operated really hurt a part of me. And not just me, but I think a lot of us can say that too. So, in turn, many of us don't get close to our parents to where we have a deep understanding of each other. I absolutely resented the parenting practices. I haven't really talked about this with anyone besides close friends, but I'll go on the record and tell my story. A few years ago, I actually had suicidal thoughts. And on rare occasions, I would, openly express that I had these thoughts on my social media. My mother eventually found out about this, and rather than sitting down and comforting me about the malicious intent that I had towards myself, she scolded me for being stupid and how if I took my own life, I'd be punished in the afterlife for all eternity. Of all the other hurtful things she told me that night, one thing that did stick with me and gave me some sense of healing was that she said, "There's a light at the end of the tunnel." And she was right. No matter how dark life can get, if you just keep on walking, you will eventually find the light at the end of the tunnel. It's all about how being resilient can help you find a way out of the abyss. And I really thank my mom for those words, despite the tone and words she threw at me that night. And I know it was all out of love, even if some things came out wrong. And if you can identify that your parents mean well, even after scolding you, you know you're loved, and it's a form of self growth for you and just being mature enough to see that. Because as a hormone enraged teen, you don't see that. It's all just bullshit coming out of their mouth, and all you can recognize at that moment is that they're pissing you off. But growing up, you start to see things a 15-year-old wouldn't see. So continuing with what I came to hate with being Hmong is just how judgmental the culture is. And that really goes back to first impressions and how that is so important in our culture. Hmong parents would tell you that you can't date outside your race, that your partner is too ugly, that someone comes from a bad family, so they must also be bad. They don't even give themselves a chance to get to know someone before they pass judgment onto them. There is just no filter. I heard so many forms of judgment growing up that I believed it was a part of just being Hmong. It was a norm in the culture to basically talk shit about someone you have no idea about because you want to protect your pride and your honor. Asian elders have such a strong will to be correct, even when you present the facts to them to prove them otherwise, and I absolutely hated that. And, these are issues that I had with the culture growing up as a teen and early into my adulthood. So that really brings us with issues that I realized as I entered my 20s. The problems that I now advocate against were things that you just don't think about when you're a kid because, in a sense, it didn't directly affect you at that point in time. Something that I dislike about the Hmong culture now is the patriarchal society that places Hmong women in shackles. That's kind of the best way that I can put it. Hmong women are still second-class citizens, and for those of you who don't know what a second-class citizen is, essentially they are people whose rights and privileges are inferior to another. Along with that is that they're systematically discriminated against. That puts Hmong women at a disadvantage and allows the mistreatment and exploitation of them because of the strong patriarchal system that they live in. And with that being said, when you put men on such a high pedestal, it gives them a sense that they can do as they please with Hmong women. And in most cases, they know they'll obey because that's the way the culture has been for so long, that they typically see little resistance. It gives rise to high percentages of domestic violence, murder suicides, and divorce within our community. And this patriarchy breeds negative societal factors as well, such as traditional gender norms. Examples like women do the cooking, cleaning, have the responsibility of bearing and raising children. Women must be obedient, submissive. Men make all of the decisions. These are just a few of the examples of how a patriarchal society can have a negative impact on a widespread scale. With the beliefs that with the beliefs that American culture has taught me, I believe that both men and women should be equal. We should all be fighting for an egalitarian society. Hmong men have fought for our freedoms and continued to really dream of that freedom while immigrating to other parts of the world. But the question that I have is it so hard to allow freedom for our daughters? Or is freedom only freedom if it only benefits a specific party? Just think about that. Is freedom only freedom if it only benefits a specific party? We must do better and teach our daughters, nieces, wives, and mothers that they are not slaves. They are more than just a maid to cook and clean at a moment's notice. They're more than an empty shell that accepts harsh words from their in-laws and remains obedient because they fear reprisal and repercussions for speaking their minds. But one of the greatest things to spring from immigrating to progressive countries is that we're given the tools and resources to make the changes that we want to see. We can change these ways. And I think one of the best defining moments of Hmong history in America is seeing Hmong women come out of their shells and fighting back the oppression. They're finally voicing their opinions and have created resources and outreach programs for other Hmong women. Coming to America has helped us realize that things that we may have thought was okay for the longest time is actually not okay. When you're taught and given a taste of true freedom, you can't help but want to break away from the chains of generational trauma. And so I say to our Hmong women, keep up the good fight, guys. Don't stop. So you can see that wherever Hmong people have gone, they have adapted so well to those places. We have found our place in America and are no longer idly standing by and accepting archaic ideologies. And that's what makes me love being Hmong. It took me a while to find self-love for my ethnic identity, but I'm so proud of us. A reason why I love us so much is that we are such a resilient people. We have been through hell and back, guys, honestly. From being pushed out of the Yellow River Basin to the southern provinces of China, to the mountains and foothills of Laos, Thailand, Burma, and Vietnam. We didn't exactly have the most ideal conditions when we moved to these new and unknown locations during the Hmong diaspora, but we made do with what we had. We carved rice paddies into the foothills, created agriculture in hostile mountains. We survived mass genocides and forced assimilation. we have really stood the test of time. We're still here and we're going nowhere. And we truly are survivors. I learned to appreciate these things as I got older, and I can attribute that to my curiosity for our history from my uncle being a Hmong historian, traveling to and from China to learn of our people. His efforts had me suddenly spending countless hours reading about the thousands of years of trials and tribulations that we've endured. That is where I truly found love for our people. And the greatest love that you can give is the love you give yourself. Be proud of who you are. Never be ashamed of where you come from, despite our shortcomings. Nothing is perfect. We just have to learn how to be almost perfect in our own little ways and keep treading through this thing we call life. And so that brings us to the conclusion of this episode. That is a wrap, guys. I truly thank everyone who made it this far and for listening in on my podcast. It truly means the whole world to me. Again, please stay safe out there, guys. COVID is still affecting us, so wash your nasty ass hands, rinse your ass crack, wear, wear your masks, and just please be mindful of the people around you, okay? But that's all I have for today, and I will see you guys again on the next episode of the Let's Slam podcast. Deuces.